everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm back with part 2 of my build tutorial series, where hopefully I'll get to talk you through the decoration of the outside of the house as well as some of the landscaping elements. But before I get started, I just wanted to announce the winners of the stuff pack of choice from my last video. Now, there was actually over 600 entries into the giveaway, and I kind of felt like that was a lot of people for just one stuff pack, so I decided to go ahead and give away 2. So the winners of the stuff pack of choice are Natalie, and I have to laugh at this username, Cheeky Bugger. So congratulations. I have contacted you via the comments section. If you want to get in touch with me via Twitter or my email, then that's in the description box below. So I just wanted to say a massive thank you to everybody who entered the giveaway, and rest assured we will be doing more giveaways in the future as well. So for those of you who haven't seen part 1, I'll leave it in the description box below and be sure to go and check that out. But today we're just going to be going over the rest of the build process. So the first thing that I want to do before we get started is to enter in the Move Objects cheat. This is one of the first cheats I always enter when I come to build, because if I don't enter it in, it's never long before I end up having to do it anyway. So in order to apply the Move Objects cheat, we press Ctrl, Shift and C. And we type in bb.moveobjects space on and then enter. And to close the console, you simply press Ctrl, Shift and C again. So now we have our Move Objects cheat active. So one of the first things that I wanted to talk about was how you adjust the height of your roof. Now, as you can see, in a similar fashion to objects that are on the ground, the roof, as you adjust it with the arrow, appears to be snapping to a grid. However, if you hold Alt at the same time as you have your arrow selected, you'll notice that it actually comes off the grid. So Alt's a really handy key to have. It allows you to place things exactly where you want them. So it might just be that you've built a particular roof and you only want to move it the slightest little bit, and Alt allows you to do that. So if I select the arrow with the left-hand mouse button and hold it, and I hold Alt at the same time, you can see that I can place that roof exactly where I want it. So also, as you can see down here, we have a couple of arrows which allow us to adjust the length of the roofing. And this can come in handy when you're building a certain particular style. So if we use these little arrows at the bottom, it will allow us to adjust both sides of the roof. However, if you only want to adjust one side of the roof, you can take the arrow of the side of the roof that you want to adjust, hold Shift and pull down, and you'll see that it actually only adjusts one side, and exactly the same on the other side. If you wanted to adjust this side to look different, you would hold the arrow with the left-hand mouse button, hold Shift and adjust. And as you can see, it will just manually adjust it to exactly how you like it. So they're maybe not shortcuts that you would use all the time, but they are things that are handy to know and use if you're doing a particular roofing style. So something else I wanted to mention as well, as we only really talked about the gabled roofs last time, was the hipped roofs. So if I delete this and I apply a hipped roof. Now, ordinarily, probably in this particular build, you would apply a half hipped roof, but it doesn't matter either way. So if I apply a hipped roof to this particular section, you'll see here it's very, very flush with the wall. The edges of the roof are very, very flush with the wall. And I feel like this looks really quite unnatural. And in fact, you can actually see the very tops of the wall. I mean, you can go on, and what a lot of people do is add a trim, but I still don't feel like that looks quite natural. So what I tend to do is, if you click on the roof, you'll see that we also have these little arrows at the very, very edges. And as you pan your camera around, they actually disappear. So you'll need to be virtually facing the side that you want to kind of adjust, and it will pop up again. And all you need to do is just pull this down slightly. I mean, you can actually adjust these right the way out, like so. But for the purposes of just placing an ordinary hipped roof, I always adjust it where I pull it down just one. So that's how it will look when you place it down ordinarily, but I click on it and I just pull it down one. And I feel like when you look at that, it's got a lot more of a natural edging and a bit more of a realistic look than if I was to leave it without that. So that's something else to bear in mind with roofing. So I think it's also worth me mentioning with regards to that particular technique is that I think one of the problems that people have is when they choose to use an exterior trim on the outside of the building. So if I pull this particular bit down and then say I wanted to use an exterior trim around the edge, you'll see here that it cuts in. So I think a lot of people then choose to shorten it so it exposes the exterior trim. However, there is a workaround for that. So if you extend the roof back down, select the roof and press Shift C, you'll notice that the couple of balls become available for you to further manipulate the roof. So if you take the very bottom ones and simply lift up, it lifts up and it gets rid of the cutting in. So that way you've got a much more kind of natural roof as well as an exterior trim. So that's kind of a workaround for that. So I think a lot of people would be quite happy with the way that the house looks, and many people will go on to kind of do the landscaping element at this point. But this is actually where I get really excited about the decoration, and there is this little section down at the bottom called wall sculptures, and it's just below the window on the left hand side. And if you click on it, this is very much pack dependent, this section. There are a lot of items that come from multiple different packs, so it depends what you have in this particular section as to how you can decorate the house. But in this particular section, you'll find corbels as well as wall ivy, hangings. There's absolutely loads of different items. You've got your balconies as well as your awnings. And this is where I feel like you can really start to personalise the house to have a lot more personality. So I really love applying awnings to my builds, especially a build in this particular style. And I really love this one by Cats and Dogs because it comes in so many different varieties that match so many different roofing colours and patterns. Sometimes it can be quite hard to pick, just clicking on this colour swatch here, which one is going to actually suit the build, because it's just this particular picture is just so very small. So I'm going to show you a couple of different ways that you can colour cycle through different swatches of items. So I have my awning picked here. If I place the item and use the letter R, this will select the design tool and it will bring up this little symbol next to it as well. So if we press R and click on the item, you'll see that the colour swatch actually appears up at the top, and you're able to kind of look through and it will cycle through the different colours. So there you can pick exactly which one that you want, or which one that, you know, actually matches the best. So another way is if you have a keyboard that has a separate number pad, you're able to cycle through colours in a different way. So when you have your object selected, on your number pad you have a plus and minus button, and if you press them you'll see that it will manually cycle through each of the swatches. So if I'm cycling through and I see one and I think, oh, actually I really want that one, if you press the plus one, it will go back through in the opposite direction, so you can pick exactly which one you want. So that's really quite handy for lots of different items as well. So it might be that you're picking a particular sofa and you really want in a blue swatch of sofa, but you can't really quite see from the patterns which one's going to look best. So you have your item selected and you can just cycle through the swatches like so. So also this comes in handy in landscaping as well. I know this particular bush comes in a lot of different coloured swatches, so if I use my plus and minus button, I'm able to cycle through and find the colour that I want specifically. Now something else which I really like to place are corbels on the edges of the house, and these come in an array of different colours as well. But sometimes, like these ones from Seasons, They stick out just way too much for my liking. Now, this particular style is handy when you're doing certain types of builds, so maybe a farmhouse build, it would look perfect on. But for just a normal suburban house, I really love the style, but it's just far too big. So that's where you can use your sizing up and down of items. So if I take this corbel here and I hold shift and press open bracket, you'll see that the item goes smaller. And if I press close bracket, you'll see that it gets bigger. And you can do this for literally any item in the game when you have the Move Objects cheat active. So for instance, if I took a sofa, and before placing it, I hold shift and close bracket, or shift and open bracket, then you will see that these can be sized up or down. Now that comes in handy a little bit later on when we do landscaping, because there are lots of nifty things that you can do to really change your garden up. So I really love this particular tree, but I can have this tree in multiple different sizes. Now we have the option to size objects up and down. So I could have that tree like that, and I could size it up. Or I could create a little border that has just some smaller ones on it as well. So sizing up and down of objects is really quite handy. So moving back to corbels, one of my favourite ones is by Cats and Dogs, and it's called the Corbella of Strength. And you can use corbels in different ways. You can line the entire wall, or you can just place them at the very top. Now, if you want to move items on the outside of the house exactly where you want them, if you select the object and hold Alt, you'll see that it comes off the grid, and I can place this precisely where I want it. So when I'm placing items anywhere on the sides of the house, I always use the Alt key at the same time, because it allows me the freedom to place it exactly where I want it, as opposed to it snapping to some kind of grid. Also, something that I find quite handy as well is not only can I press Alt to place it exactly where I like it, but I know that I'm going to end up using lots and lots of ivy up the side of the house. So I also hold shift at the same time. So by holding Alt and shift, it allows me to place it exactly where I want. And once I've placed it, it duplicates the item. And this way it stops me from having to place an item, go back and select the next one. I mean, I think this one automatically anyway selects another one, but I mean, it can be for anything. So if we place a corbel, for instance, and we want to place multiple corbels around the outside, then instead of having to select them one by one, I can just hold shift and Alt, and it will just duplicate the item, and this just saves a lot of time. So something else I like to place quite a lot is chimneys, and obviously we built this external chimney here. Now to finish this one off, I'd probably take a small chimney, place it just inside the very top, and you can just play around with different types of chimneys. I know this particular one, if I size it down, that's going to fit, and that will just complete and finish off that chimney. So I also like to place chimneys over on the roof as well. I think this just adds a little bit more character as well to the house. And these come in an array of different colours and sizes as well. And it's just worth playing around really. Normally I pick one which kind of matches the exterior of the house in a similar sort of shade, and I'll apply it at the very top. Now you can apply it straight on like so, or you can kind of put them on an angle, and by doing that I hold Alt, press the left mouse button and swivel, and as you can see you can put this again on an angle. So sometimes I place them on an angle like this. But yeah, you can just play around and see what you can come up with. But there's a lot of different things that you can use as well in the roof. So in the Get Together pack, we have these royal pointed roofs. And you can add these into certain builds which add character as well. So they're quite good for Tudor builds. And we also have this kind of Victorian style one that came with the Vampires expansion. So you can just kind of give the illusion that there's actually, you know, a room within the roof when there isn't. So you can really play around with the outside. You can also add these points here from the Get Together pack. And I like to add these at the very, very tops of the roofs. And that again just adds a slight bit of character. But there's all sorts of decorations depending on which packs you have that you can add to your roof just to kind of give it a bit more of a detailed look. Now I'm going to move on next to the landscaping element, and the first thing that I think about when I come to landscaping is tree placement. So what I'll tend to do is place a few trees fairly close to the house before moving on to kind of like the fencing and the rest of the landscaping. So there's really no right or wrong way to place trees. You can use lots of different types of trees in any way you choose to add them. If you look in the real world, there are clusters of trees, there are trees standing alone, and they come in all sorts of different shapes and sizes. So I don't really feel that you can go too wrong with placing trees. However, there's a couple of things to bear in mind, and one of the things you don't want to do with trees is to place them in the way of the house, in the sense that you're blocking the way the house looks. So for instance, if I took this particular tree here, one of my favourite combinations is to use this one as well as this one together. Now, if I was going to place those, I wouldn't want to place it here, and I wouldn't want to place one here, because already you're blocking the view of the house. So by placing this one here, you're taking away from the beauty of having this external chimney, so you can't really see it very well. And if I place sort of them over here, I'm almost kind of hiding the house away. So where I feel like that's quite common sense, but it's worth thinking about when you're building your build, because you want to show the beauty of the shape of your house, and you don't want it to be hidden away at all by the way that you place the trees. So a lot of the time I like to place them in the middle. So as you can see here, by placing this particular tree here and placing one just slightly in front, you can still see the full shape of the house. I'm not actually hiding anything. And you can actually be quite clever with the tree placement as well. If you built something that you wanted to hide, you can use trees to do that as well. That can come in quite handy. But yeah, I think it's always nice to add them into corners, like corner sections of houses as well. And it just kind of like takes up any sort of empty space that's showing on the outside of the house. So for instance, if I wanted to place a tree on this particular side, I'd look to place one around here, because by placing it there, I'm not blocking any of the windows. Or, I mean, you could always place them on the corners as well. It's entirely up to you. So a lot of the time I also think about where I'm building, and obviously I'm building currently in Brindleton Bay, and it uses a lot of these trees that came with the Cats and Dogs expansion, when I can find them, these ones. So we have a lot of these within the environment. So sometimes if you're building for a specific lot, you can always incorporate the sorts of trees that are within the environment so that the house fits in even more. Now, I absolutely love this tree, but this tree is far too huge. So I always like to size it down to a little bit more of a manageable size. But yeah, you can kind of layer up your trees to fit in with their environment as well. Now, once I'm happy roughly with where a few of the trees are placed closer to the house, I'll then move on to the pathing of the house and sort of think about how I want to lay out the path around the house. Now, there's a couple of ways you can do that. You can use the terrain paint tool, or you can go ahead and use ordinary floor tiles. Now, if we were going to select a floor tile, you can they're quite easy and straightforward to use, and you can just do a straight floor tile section all the way to the very edge. But something else that you can also do is if you press Ctrl and F, it will actually section these tiles into quarters, so you can then do a little bit more of an intricate pattern around your sort of pathways. And in order to get the particular tile back to normal, you just press Ctrl F again, and then you have the full size tile back. So one of the ways that I like to do my pathing is actually with the terrain tool, which you'll find over here on the left hand side. Now in this particular section you've got an array of different kinds of terrain tool, flooring and patterns, from grass right the way through to stone or even sand. So there's quite a lot in these sections. Now this has been something that's been highly requested for me to talk through how I managed to get the terrain kind of the paint to look so smooth. And basically along the bottom here we have something which adjusts the softness of the terrain. So you'll notice that if I pick this particular square and I have it all the way to the hardest end and I press it, it will instantly appear. Whereas if I move this right the way down to the softer side, you'll see that gradually the path appears over time. So I think where people go wrong is when this softness is just far too thick. So I'll show you an example. If I wanted to map a path that was around and went all the way around the build, you'll see that if I use this particular one and I make sure that my hardness is all the way up, you'll see that when I come to map the path out, when you look closer, it's quite unforgiving and it leaves these very jaggedy edges all the way around, and I just don't think it looks particularly nice. So one of the things that I do is I turn my softness all the way down to probably around here, and as you'll notice, if you just take it nice and slow, the path gradually appears and is a lot more forgiving in the way that it turns out. And when you do it a lot softer, you're not left with all of these jaggedy edges. It's kind of a lot more of a smooth effect. And I think sometimes on the speed build as well, it looks as if I do these really, really fast. But in actual fact, I just take my time with it and I'll roughly map it out and then I'll just go back over it. Because just by going over it, I'm not going to affect the very, very edges when the setting is on this soft. And that's really all it is just adjusting this particular softness from right the way up this end to right the way down this end, and it just is a little bit more forgiving. So you can always use your grid as well for guidance. I highly recommend that. I use that myself as well. In actual fact, we're not going to use that particular pattern. I think I'll probably use this one. So you can just take it, and you can actually increase it a little bit here because you're working within guidelines. And just take it nice and slow all the way down. Because the thing is, by taking your time with it, it means that you don't have to go back and correct it. So it's a lot easier to kind of take your time and get it right the first time, as opposed to having to keep going back and correcting it. So now we have a little path down here to the roadside. I then think about the path that was going around the side of the house. So a lot of the time I do this, and because I always think you need to have some sort of path that leads from the front of the house to the back. So I'll adjust the softness down again, and then I'll slowly, in just sort of like wavy patterns, kind of map out a little path that goes all the way around, like so. And once you've kind of figured out where your path's going to be, this has also not only mapped out your path, but potentially mapped out where potential flower beds are going to be as well. So that kind of makes it quite easy. And then when you get round to the back of the house, you want to think about where you'd like to put sort of a patio area, somewhere to sit, like a barbecue area. So I normally like to sort of map out a little solid block where I can later place things like picnic tables or, you know, a little table and chairs. So once I've got a rough idea of sort of a little bit of pathing and whereabouts I would like to have sort of the patio area, I then go back and I think about how I want my fencing to be. Now there's a few different ways you can do fencing. You can literally do it in just a straight all the way round box, or you can be a little bit inventive and you can come up with just like a nice little pattern that goes around the build. It's entirely up to you. Something that I like to do, especially when I'm building in Brindleton Bay, is to do a fence that goes all the way around. Now, a lot of the time you'll find that a lot of my fences go right the way around my perimeter, and there is a reason for that. I mean, sometimes I don't always do it, but most of the time I do, and that's simply because when it comes to landscaping, I like to make the most of the lot, basically. I like to fill the lot with lots of things that your Sims can do. Otherwise, for me, it's just wasted space. So I like to be a little bit inventive as well with my fences. I mean, it's up to you. You can go ahead and you can place a gate at the very front or an archway. As you can see here, you're going to need a gate which is kind of 3 spaces wide to fill that particular spot. So a lot of the time I just go ahead and just delete that part of the fence. But I like to be kind of inventive with my fences, and so I'll do little things like I'll take this little starter hedge and I'll size it up, and this will be like the entrance, and then I'll maybe like go around and put them on each corner like so. And it just gives a little bit more character to the fencing. Now, when I'm building in Brindleton Bay, there's a reason as well why I like to do fences all the way around, and that's because I'm really not a fan of this particular terrain. For me, it just looks quite dull, and I like to do my landscaping quite vibrant and quite lush, so I always end up using this one, which I think is from Outdoor Retreat, which is the deep forest green. Or if I'm doing sort of a base game build, I'll use this natural oasis, and I'll just literally, it's a good idea as well if you are going to do this to kind of do it before you do your pathing, otherwise you're going to have to go back round and just carefully do it around your path. But just to kind of give you an idea, if you do this, you know, it just kind of brightens up the garden area a lot more than if you were to leave it this colour. So once you've mapped out roughly how you want your terrain to be and you've done your fencing, the next thing I tend to move on to is mapping out the flower bed areas. Now, there's no right or wrong way to do this. Some people do this, some people don't. It's just entirely up to you. But I do find it a lot easier to kind of come up with some sort of rough shape of where I'd like some flowers to be. So I'll just take this particular darker soil and just roughly map out exactly where I'm going to put sort of the flowers. So once you've mapped out roughly where you'd like your flower beds to be, it's now time to place the plants, and I tend to like to place a lot of green coloured flowers with white sort of tones, and if I'm doing pops of colour in the garden, it's something that I'll later go back and add in. Now, one of the problems that you may come across is with a house that has a foundation. Now, if your house has a foundation on it, you may struggle to place the flowers close to the wall. So I'll give you an example. If I wanted to place, for instance, this particular bush right up close, then you'll see that it actually jumps right up above the foundation, and this can be really frustrating when you're trying to do the flowers and you know you've only got a couple to place and you're just struggling. So the easy solution to that is literally to drop your foundation right the way down, and then this way you're able to place them right the way up close to the house. And you could do whatever it is that you want to do, whatever you want to place. And then once you higher the foundation straight back up, those flowers will stay in place. Now, don't worry about any kind of stairs or anything that you have in place. All that will stay exactly where it is. When you lower the foundation, you place it back up. It's just a much quicker way to place those plants without you know, going through the struggle of trying to get them up close. So once you've placed your flowers roughly where you want them to be, a lot of the time I like to add a border around that particular section. I just feel like it makes it stand out a little bit more, and there's a couple of different ways you can do this. You can do it using objects like fencing or actual objects to kind of make and create a border around the section, or you can use terrain paint, which is one of the things I like using the most. So I'll just literally go around, maybe pick a kind of stone pattern. It really doesn't matter, there's a lot of choice, and I'll just kind of map around the particular flower bed all the way around. And then something that I like to do a lot is then go back in and just add a lot of the darker sort of soil colour around the very bottoms of the plants, because I just feel like this adds a little bit more of a realistic element. But as you can see there, it kind of pops out a little bit more. I just think it looks a little bit prettier. So terrain paint is really quite important, because not only do I use it around the borders, or I use it to lay down a solid colour on the grass, but a lot of the time I use it to allow shading around objects. So the next thing I want to go back to, now we've roughly got an idea of where we'd like some flower beds to be, is the trees. So what I'll do is I'll find a combination of trees that I'm happy with, and I'll place them down. So once you're happy with roughly where your trees are placed, I then go back in to add kind of like a shadow effect underneath the trees. So I'll take a really wide, large circle, and I will bring the softness right the way down, pick the soil one, and literally just dab around the base of the tree. Depends how big the tree is as to how big the circle needs to be. And what I find by doing that is you're creating a more realistic look in the way that the tree looks, because if you think about an ordinary tree, around the base of the tree there's going to be a lot of sort of soil and areas where the grass hasn't been able to grow, and I am always striving to look for a more realistic look, and I find that these terrain tools can come in really handy in that respect. So you can create all sorts of different effects with the terrain paint. Something else which I like doing quite a lot is to take these flowery kind of tones, and this is normally towards the end of a build, and I'll just go around very lightly and add and just tap a little bit of colour here and there into the grass, especially if we've got quite wide open spaces with the grass. This just breaks up and gives it a little bit more dimension, and I feel like this is a bit more realistic as well, because a lot of the time when you look at a lawn, it's not just one solid colour. There are areas where it's kind of browned off. There may be areas where you have flowers that are growing through, so I'm constantly using the terrain paint to create dimension to the outside of the landscaping and make it look more realistic. So a lot of the time I tend to concentrate on the front of the house before moving on to the back of the house as well. But once I get to this point, I start to think about what items I'd like to use in the kind of garden area. So what activities and skill building items I like to use. And then I like to kind of roughly place them down where I'd like them to be. So over in this outdoor section, there is an outdoor activities section. So you can kind of map out and have a look and think, right, I'd really like in this particular build to put this jungle gym. So I think, well, you know, I'd like to roughly place it here. Or it might be that you choose that you want to place a pool there. So you'll go over to the pool section and kind of map out roughly where you'd like your pool to be. Like so. And slowly, as you can see, the house is actually filling up along the outside. And you can take this as far as you like. You might like a cleaner kind of landscaping look, or you might like a landscaping look that's just got loads and loads of details. So you could be adding around the back more trees around this particular area. So for instance, a lot of the time if I use a particular type of tree at the front, I like to kind of stick with those same sort of trees. So I'll go ahead again and add maybe one of these in around the back. But you don't have to, you can change it up and maybe stick something like this one around the back. And constantly I'm just going back over the same process, which is adding in the soil around the base to give it more of a realistic look. And just slowly over time building up that detail. And sometimes I'll do things like I'll add a little bit of grass at the base of the tree. And you can size it down or you can size it up. Just really have a play around and see what things you can come up with. So I think it's important to remember that there's no right or wrong way to do landscaping. You can put as much as you like into the garden, or you can put as little as you like. It's entirely up to you. But just know that there isn't a right or wrong way to do it. It's just a matter of experimenting and there is inspiration for landscaping all around us, everywhere that we look. And if it may be that you're going out one day and you see something in somebody's garden and you think, oh, I really like the way that flower bed looks, or I like the way they've arranged, those group of trees look, I don't know, whatever it may be, and try and implement it into your game. See if you can recreate that garden. But always push the boundaries when it comes to building and doing landscaping, because sometimes it works and sometimes it just doesn't. And if it doesn't, that's okay. Nobody's perfect, and even the best of the best builders have days when things just don't work right. But it's just a case of taking a little step back, a little break, and just going at it with a fresh mind the next day. So this has actually turned out to be another very, very long video, so I really appreciate it if you've got to this point. And I hope that somewhere amongst the video you've managed to pick up a helpful kind of hint or tip along the way. Thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, please give me a big thumbs up, and if you're not subscribed, it would be amazing to have you on board. But have a fantastic week, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Take care, bye.